Welcome to Human Side Up, everyone. My name is Natasha Newton, and I am your host. And I'm really excited to share today's conversation with you. I always have amazing conversations, but this one with Sara Toussaint was just a delight and a joy. She's just such a wonderful person to engage with. Sara has over 20 years of experience in sports marketing and management and has made significant contributions across various leagues from Major League Baseball and Major League Soccer, as well as the Mexican national team. She's also recognized on the inaugural Latinos in Sports list in 2020 for her impactful work. She's recently been appointed as the co-CEO and head of Catalyst, which is the new commercial division of TMJ, which is a leading Hispanic-owned women's soccer agency, and is the co-owner of the women's national soccer team, the NC Courage, and a founding partner at Underdog Ventures, which is a social impact enterprise that supports underrepresented founders and offers marketing services in sports and entertainment. Sara is educated in policy from the University of Chicago and holds an MBA from Stern, but her academic background and her professional and personal backgrounds all combined have really equipped her a really strong foundation in both business and policy, which she has been leveraging in her professional endeavors for years. Sara has also been active in advocating through her involvement with Latinx in Sports, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing visibility and influence for Latinx individuals in the sports industry. She is whip smart, full of joy and lots of fire, and a delightful human that I am super excited to introduce you to today. Sara Toussaint, I'm so excited to have you here and be having this conversation with you. Thank you, for making time. I know how busy you are as a human being and doing all the things that you're doing, but I also just really appreciate both your passion, right, and your emotion around the things that we're talking about here today, but also your commitment to doing it, which is why you're such a busy human, because you are trying to make opportunity and access. And so I'm really excited. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. It is an honor, and I know it's gonna be a pleasure. And I don't know if you got a time allotment, but I'll try and stay under it because I can go on for a while.
No worries. That's why we have great editors. So super excited to have you here. Um, so I'm going to ask you a question that we start with all of our guests, which is if there were one or two words to describe you that you would pick, that we might not see on a CV or a resume, what would they be? And when did you start to own them for yourself as true?
Two words. The first one is energetic.
Yeah.
And the second one, in terms of two words, compassionate.
Hmm.
Um, for energetic, I just want to move on stuff that gets me excited, which luckily that's, career wise, it's been most of my career for the most part. Don't get me
Mm.
wrong. Every time, every career will have its lulls where you're just like, oh, right. There's
Yeah.
some drag, some work that kind of feels like this is dragging me out, but I want to be enthusiastic. I have been enthusiastic. And so I hope that energy, gets, absorbed and is seen by the people around me. I will
Mhm.
say that it's not something I was necessarily like embraced. It was not a characteristic I necessarily embraced. I felt that in order to quote unquote be a leader, you had to be more measured, which of course is a
Mm.
good thing, but that meant you were maybe a slower talker and you kind of digested every word. And I'm very much I want the data, but in the end, I'm gonna go what feels right.
Mm.
And sometimes that's a very quick feeling, and that's where some of the energy comes from. And when I say energetic, it's certainly like, it's like fast and fast paced and let's move. But it's also like the enthusiasm behind the work that I'm
Mm.
doing, if that makes sense, right? So energy
Yeah.
is both from maybe like fast paced, but also like just the level of excitement I have for whatever it is I'm working on. And so when did I embrace that? I think, as I've been approached throughout the last few years, probably, I can actually pinpoint it to like, let's say post like 2018. um, I've seen this bullet point on job descriptions and it's executive presence, right? And I just
Mm,
remember thinking, I don't have that, right? And being very self-conscious about it. And actually went and spoke to a career coach or like somebody to help me navigate like what my next path is going to be because there were so many areas I could take and just working with her I realized like I don't want to change. I'm good. Like I am really
yes.
comfortable with who I am. So that was one. And same thing goes with the compassionate piece. Like I
Mm,
remember talking with a former manager about how we should be rewarding some of our interns and it was kind of like, well, we haven't done that before or this is how it's always been done or I'm just remembering you know what, these interns don't make a ton of money. Like, can we just
mhm.
not give them a little bit more and just make sure they're in a good headspace to like give us like if we're asking for everything, like can we help
Yeah.
help them um help them better, be positioned to be able to do that. And so I just feel like I make a lot of decisions based on compassion and I think that's mostly good. I think that's mostly good. I think, there may be moments where maybe I was a sucker, or maybe I was naive, but I'm also okay with that because I rather believe that, at least for me, most of the people I work with are good people and we
Mhm.
want to come to the same conclusion. And so, it's funny, even in negotiations, whether it's, with myself or um, myself and an employer or myself and a vendor or myself and a consultant, whatever it is, right? I'm always thinking about like their positioning,
Mm,
like how does it feel to be in their shoes? And I want to, come across as somebody who's empathetic to what they want out of out of this, negotiating table. Um, Hoping that it would make for a better negotiation, and I think that's been mostly good. I don't wanna say one, I think we've both come out okay feeling like, "Okay, Sarah's somebody I can work with and trust, and
mhm.
she's telling me, all her cards are on the table, and she's not, just trying to say one thing to do another," right? It's not like it's calculated, but calculated from a place of, like, I really want them to feel like I heard where they're coming from, I understand their position. I wanna get what I want out of this too, but is there somewhere where, we feel like this is not a all out war, right?
Mm.
So, anyway, those are the 2 things. That was a very long answer, but
That was a great answer, and you just described amazing leadership,
mm,
right? Like, I'm with you, like, what the hell does executive presence even mean? Like, what does
mm,
that mean? Does that mean that I show up for my team? Does that mean I'm advocating for them and putting them in the spotlight? Or is it I'm taking all this, right? Like, there's
yeah,
that old school version of
right.
this, and then there is the version that is led with compassion and empathy, the things you were just talking about. Like, I want everybody to win. I think there is we are plagued, and I'm gonna say particularly in this country, though I think in a lot of places, but particularly here with the zero sum
Mm,
sort of thinking that if you win, I can't win. Right. And I think what you're talking about is that, well, I want to know what you want out. Like, how do we partner together? Like, how does everybody, there is enough, right? There is enough. And I think that really goes to the notion of um, inclusion and diversity, all these things that you're working toward, access, but that leadership, like it's the foundation for that. So you just summed everything up and I mean, we could be done talking at this point. Like,
No, thank you. And you know what you said? It's like really what is the question? What does it mean to have executive presence? And to me, it immediately went, I look a certain way, I talk a certain
mhm.
way, I act a certain way, and it's a very prescribed way, especially in, the industry
Yeah.
that I'm in, which is sports, right?
Yeah.
But you're right. Why did I make that assumption? Why couldn't I have been like, no, this is what it should be, this is what it is to me. But
Well,
I
I think we've all done that though. Like, I'm not putting it on you to feel bad about that because I think that's
yeah.
how that's how we've all grown up, right? I think there has been a shift maybe in the last, let's say 15 years ago, maybe people
Hmm.
started talking about it, but like really it hasn't taken hold in business until recently, that it doesn't look the way we thought that it always did. So I love that. I love
Yeah.
that that's where your head is and you're like, yeah, but that's not me. So how do I do this and still be my own self and bring my own self and have that fire and enthusiasm that you have, which is one of the words I used to describe you when I was doing an intro. I was like, just this fiery, like passionate. So I think that's fantastic. I love it.
You're right on.
Yeah. So, let's talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, about your own journey and some of the experiences that you have had that have shaped maybe the way you think about leadership or the way you think about inclusion in the work that you do. Because you have spent a lot of time in your career doing a lot of different things,
Mhm.
right? Like you're educated in policy and those types of things in business, but um, you've spent a lot of time thinking about access, opportunity, equity. So, like, what are some of the experiences you've had that have shaped your understanding of those things?
Yeah, I think I've definitely zigzagged in my career, which I think makes me a little bit more open to the possibilities and potential of people, like,
Uh-huh.
if they're interested in joining, where I'm working and my team or what have you, but I think, like, where all that really is as I'm thinking about it, which I've thought about it before, but I don't you're getting to the origin story, which I think is well, it could go really, really deep, but, like, at the most conscious for me was getting to college and feeling so, like, a fish out of water, and probably a
Uh-huh.
lot of people felt that way, right? But I went to a pretty elite institution, but I attended Chicago public schools my whole life, and so
Yeah.
getting to college and feeling like, "Oh my god, I don't know the things these people are talking about," and I
Mm.
remember being so frustrated and not dumb, but just, like, ill-equipped, right? Because 'Cause I'm like, "I know I can do this," right? And I told myself, I'm like, "Alright, I got my first D in college," and I was like, "Oh, horrible." Um, and I was like, "Okay, I just have to graduate with at least a 3.0." That was the goal, right? That was a focus. But in the meantime, I just realized how not prepared I was, and I thought about my public school education, and I was like, "All right, well, I can try and help some people with this." And so I would actually go
Mhm.
back to my high school and say, "This is what my college experience is like. These are the things that you should be
Yes.
focusing on," right? So that was just like a personal experience um that I where I was consciously motivated to help in some shape or form. So that was like the first
Mhm.
instance, and I think since then it just kind of, like not feeling welcome in other spaces. That was maybe primarily, male dominant, and I felt I had to, fit in a certain way and act a certain way, and realizing like that wasn't going to get me, any more respected or,
Yeah.
the interesting career projects or anything like that. And I just realized, like one, like just be me, right? That's it.
Mhm.
And if there's other ways that I can help others be successful, let's do that, right? And because I would have
Mhm.
liked that for myself, so it
Yeah.
wasn't like some grand plan, it was just some, like, innate, I think, feeling I've always had to, not just complain about something, but figure out if there's a way to do something about it or help somebody
Mhm.
else feeling a certain way. So, I have no strategic, approach to any of the things I do, it's just that what feels right is usually led a lot of, my decisions in this space of trying to be more inclusive and, embrace other people's experiences, whether it's, personal or career-wise, so yeah.
I love it. And public school kid myself.
Nice.
And I appreciate though that like this kind of comes back to that compassion you were talking about earlier and that leadership of like reaching back, right? And grabbing the hand of someone and pulling them forward or like showing them the path, right? Because there's that old saying like if you can't see it, you can't be it kind of thing. And I think that's really very true, And
Very much
I was
so.
just having a conversation with someone today who professional in talent acquisition with like 25 years of experience, super super smart, working for a great tech company in the startup world. Things don't always
Mhm.
pan out, so as you know, as an investor,
Mhm.
they don't always go the way that
Oh.
you hope. And so she's making a transition. And we were looking at, we're both a similar age, and she's just a couple years older than I was. And I was like, there is an opportunity here for you as a person to be the thing we didn't
Mhm.
see at our age, right? Like I'm almost 50. And when I was growing up, I know, right?
I was like, "Wait,
Thanks,
what?"
Dad, for
Yeah,
The Jamaican skin here.
yeah.
Um, there is while I had really strong women in my life, I was really fortunate in that regard. There was just a different expectation. There weren't a lot of like 50-year-old women who
Mm.
were out there like dominating and doing it in a way that was compassionate and considerate and where they were proud to be women leaders and not that they felt like they had to conform to be, to your point, have that executive presence or be whatever the thing was. And so I think it's really interesting that we're very fortunate, I think, being growing up, coming up in the age that we are, where we get to sort of change the rules a little bit, right? And we get to make it more accessible for other people. We get to make it more, get to pull back the curtains a little bit, a little less Wizard of Oz. So I love that. And you've spent a lot of time, being the spicy Latina that you are, is really focused especially on um, women in sports and Latinos in sports as a whole. And so I would love to maybe get from you a little bit about what your take is on the importance, if you will, of cultural sensitivity in
Hmm.
sort of building those teams and thinking about how you and your experience and some of the companies that you've worked with who have done this well, or maybe those who haven't done it so well, how have they sort of leveraged that sensitivity to make better teams?
Yeah. Um, I oh my gosh, where to start? So as you're asking that question, I think about me being hired for uh, a job at Major League Soccer, and that was like
Mhm.
the moment where I did not have a grand plan of what my career would look like. Again, it's I thought I was going to do policy, law, government. Did none of it, right? But or law school. I did actually work at a firm that made me say I'm not going to law school. I'm not going to be a lawyer. But going back to um and it kind of it's just so weird. And I think about like, these people and these decisions that make and those are like such huge turning points in, our lives. But
Mhm.
I was applying for a job at Major League Soccer, and on my resume there was there was my career at that point. So I'm from Chicago. I went to the University of Chicago. That's the institution I had referred to earlier. And that's the only thing in my resume that hinted I had some type of Chicago
Mhm.
connection.
Mhm.
But the hiring manager had seen I went to the University of Chicago, and he's like, "Okay, great school." I'm like, "Oh, you've heard of it?" Right? Because back when I was in school, it was nobody really knew what it was. They always confused it with another school. And he's like, "Yeah, of course." And then he's like, "Are you from Chicago?" I said, "Yes." And he's like, "Where are you from?" And I was like, "What do you mean where I'm from? Like, why does he want to know this
Right.
about
Right.
me specifically?" But he was digging in because he wanted to understand. And also, I'm trying to think, I don't think anywhere in my resume had that. Maybe I did have a reference to being part of a Latino organization, but otherwise there was
Okay.
no indication. Maybe I
Okay.
had, bilingual Spanish, and maybe that's it, right? But
Mhm.
nothing in my career really hinted at, me having like Latino insights, right?
Right.
And
Right.
marketing insights on this demographic. And so he's like asking me like, where in Chicago am I from? And I tell him the neighborhood. He's like, you're exactly who we need. And I was like, what are you talking about? So the neighborhood I grew up in is like 98% Mexican. I
Mhm.
myself am not Mexican. And I responded to him in saying, because he's like, you're exactly what we need. He's like, the Mexican market, the Mexican American market. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I was like, I'm not Mexican. I'm Puerto Rican, Palestinian. He's like, Sarah, he's like, you grew up in Little Village and Amita. You grew up this. He's like, this audience. He's like, you're gonna be the most Mexican person we have here. And I said, but at the end of the day, he was right. Like based on my
Mm.
just where I grew up, like who would have thought like my neighborhood would have had such a
Mm.
profound like impact on my career, and it did. And
Yeah.
so he was hiring me at Major League Soccer. Major League Soccer wanted to obviously they saw the Latino segment as a growth opportunity for them. In addition, the Mexican national team, which worked Major League Soccer, wanted to continue to grow their audience and their fan base in the US. So that's
Mhm.
how I got hired. And that was just, I ask people a lot of questions about themselves because I am also looking for like that taught me, one, I'm nosy, but two, like it taught me that everybody brings something to the table, even if they don't
Yes.
realize it.
Yes.
Like there's always something to learn from somebody that is going to enhance our lives, their careers, their whatever their business outcomes are. If you search for it, if you dig hard enough, right, and
Mhm.
and value people, whoever they may be, to just value them, right? It's like they've got something, and just because I may not see it on the surface doesn't mean it's not there. And so
Yeah.
I think about that, and I think I may have gone off on a tangent there, but as I'm thinking about like the importance of, just identities to like and how they impact the business, like that was it. So
Uh-huh.
so with that knowledge, I was able to work with various brands um that want to connect with the segment and say, they put some ideas together, and I would say that could work, or maybe not go this path. Let's go this path. Or in the
Mm-hmm.
language, this is what Mexican Americans will say versus Puerto Ricans, right, or Spaniards, or whatever. Translate it,
Yes.
right? And so, that's how kind of all those things kind of unfolded. That's how, part of my career has unfolded from like that moment. And so it's a huge audience. And the other kind of thing I really took pride in, I really loved the work, and I was very proud of it, was showing these brands, which initially definitely saw the value of these consumers, but to say, look at, look at the millions of Latinos who are here in the US. Think about how much spending power they have and how much that
Mm-hmm.
can impact your company, right? And so, to able to go with them, on that journey and like point them in the right direction was always very rewarding, and having them get it right. And these are, for the most part, these are brands who don't have Latino employees
Right.
making decisions, and I give them credit for even thinking about doing it in the first place, and give them
Mm-hmm.
credit for listening to me.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that. And I'd be curious if, um, you've worked with a lot of big brands, right, over the
Mhm.
course of your career in various aspects, whether it be through,
Mhm.
sponsorship, that
Yeah.
whatever. There's a million ways that you've done that. I'm curious if there are, one or two that you think have done a really good job of not just sort of
Mhm.
hijacking
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
opportunity, but of really embracing it and doing a
Mhm.
good job of connecting with that particular audience or consumer on their side.
Yeah. I mean, I worked at Wells Fargo, so that's the one I saw, like, inside. I was in it.
Mhm.
It was a bank, but I just saw, in the people who are leading diverse segments, specifically the Latino segment, I could just tell how much they cared about this community of people.
Yeah.
And the fact that we tried all types of things through the work I did, in terms of, using soccer as like that point of that launching pad for, let's try mobile banking in Spanish. Let's try social media in Spanish. Let's try,
Mm.
like, they were willing to explore and like leverage a
Yeah.
really cool marketing platform to reach an audience that was going to be receptive to that, right? Like,
Mhm.
all right, like, talking about money is not always easy
Right.
and fun, and to be able to like marry that. So I think Wells Fargo did a pretty good job. Um, so obviously I'm biased, not, unbiasedly, Home Depot,
Mm.
and AT&T are two other brands that I admire, because they have, and I'm coming at it from mostly the sports lens, but I've seen
Mhm.
them in the entertainment space too. But they've seen that the value, and they have seen, I think it's almost 20 years that they've been sponsoring programs that are, important to the Latino, community, whether
Yeah.
it's on the sports side, the entertainment side, um, uh, scholarship programs. So I feel like those are
Mhm.
two brands that have done a really, really good job, and are always like looking for like a new idea to reach that community and support that community. And, I think from a corporate, social responsibility angle, and like it's there, but just from a business angle, they get it, right? They get it. They
Yeah.
see. I don't. I think there's this. There's it's been, I think, year over year studies that show the Hispanic segment, when within the U.S., is something like the seventh largest GDP, right, in the world.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of, it's funny because there's a lot of data to support like these business decisions. But that said, there's still very limited budgets being invested into these communities, whether it's on the marketing side or infrastructure side or whatever,
Mhm.
all aspects of, at least in the US, economy, there's still a lot lacking. But anyway, so those would be my three: Wells Fargo, Home Depot, AT&T.
Yeah, no, those are great. And what I'm interested in is that you were talking about not only just um, the types of platforms, but the types of services, right?
Mhm.
Because I think of the example, and I'm gonna totally forget uh, which country this was in. It was an African country, and they were talking about it was a banking institution
Mhm.
trying to expand their footprint. And the one they worked with, man, I just really
Yeah.
wish I could remember who this was. It'll come to me. But they were talking about expanding. Yeah, exactly. I should be Googling. But they were talking about expanding their footprint. And they had one group of folks in their organization like, well, we need to put um, community banks, like community
Mhm.
local spaces. And then they had someone else who was like, no, we just need to have like we need to have just a larger marketing presence so people know who we are. And then they had someone who was local to the country they were working in. I want to say it was a Western African
Mm-hmm.
country. And they said, no, actually, the way the people you're trying to reach are all in remote areas and they're on a phone. Like
Mm-hmm.
there is no way for you to put a community bank in their space. So what you need to do is invest in mobile
Yeah.
banking, because that's how they're going to reach your audience, right? And so there was just like this massive dump of dollars there, and they were able to expand their business model. But it came from somebody who understood the community, they understood the people they were trying to talk to, and it led to, really great business outcomes for them. Like, and I think that sometimes, the conversation around, and I'll use all the words, diversity,
Mm-hmm.
equity, inclusion, and belonging, right, can
Mm-hmm.
get like taken over. Or sometimes it's used as a euphemism for black and brown,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it does mean those groups of people, but it's not only those groups of people. And so when you have, to your point, someone who's experienced a culture or has lived in and amongst or is identifies as whatever, fill in the blank. There is a different way to solve and innovate, right? So teams are they can better solve customer solutions. They can help drive market share. Like
Mm-hmm.
those things have been proven. And I'm so interested in like, I'd love to get your take on this in organizations where the business case is evident and you still have to drag people
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to the water, so to speak, to get them to drink. I'm curious if you have any experiences, and of course, not the
Yeah.
organizations you've worked for, but like any, sort of clients or partners that you've worked with that you're like, they get it on paper, but we really struggled to get them over the line. And what you did to work
Yeah.
through that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it definitely, I saw, just as the example you gave about the, the bank,
Mm.
the expanding using mobile banking versus,
Hmm.
bricks and mortar, community bank like that. That's huge. I think the resistance is sometimes it's, I will say this, sometimes the resistance is, man, the process is going to be tough
Mm.
and it's going to take too long and it's internal bureaucracy that may get in the way. Some of it may just be like, oh, we rather we rather sponsor like the NFL, right?
Mm. Uh-huh.
And it's going to get a broader, and I think to get people to open their eyes, because there was resistance to us going in the soccer direction because we were
Mm.
cutting other sponsorships for
Yeah.
like these other like beloved properties, sports properties. But there was some grumbling. But the biggest piece was like we just have to show them if they can just
Mm.
see this, right? They'll
Hmm.
get it. And it was like literally inviting them to come to games and say, just look at how many people are here
Yeah.
at 9 a.m. This game doesn't start till 9 p.m. Look how many
Right.
people here are already tailgating. This is
Hmm.
a group of folks that you can have their undivided attention for the next several hours if you wanted to come by and introduce yourselves and just
Yeah.
learn about the thing, right? So I think part of it was like them also seeing it off the paper, I think was probably the biggest piece and the biggest
Hmm.
driver to like, okay, we're gonna put some more money into this. And oh, actually, you know what? I've got 10 clients I can invite to this thing, right? I think the biggest like you can put your PowerPoint deck together, and I've had days where I'm like, oh, look at this beautiful presentation. It's gonna get, and it's like crickets. There's no movement. And part of it was like I have to physically invite them. Can you, hey, I've got extra tickets. Why
Hmm.
don't you come to the game? This is how we typically will market to the segment. These are the types of things that we can do. That was a big piece. Or other times, like, I would just do it with very little money and
Uh-huh.
then be able to show some of the successes with that, and then get some more buy-in after something had already happened, right? Because nobody
Yeah.
wants to like jump in when there is like zero, when nothing is built, right? It's
Yes.
really tough to get, unless you're super connected. It's really tough to get things off the ground without somebody being able to see some tangible, outcome or result, or even, was it the uh what's the venture term? I'm embarrassed. I'm like, I'm terrible at analogies, but like a viable product, right? Like
Oh,
because
yeah.
they're like ready to go. And so anyhow, but once we have that, we could say, oh, you weren't excited about this, but we opened up several hundred accounts this day
Hmm.
during a 2-hour meet and greet. Like what?
Right.
let's have more. Yeah, let's have more.
Yeah.
So I think a big piece of it is just having them actually see it, because the numbers that people say they want the data, but the
Hmm.
data doesn't move them all the time. So I think it has to
Stories
be the
do.
yeah,
Experience, right?
yeah,
Our
yeah.
emotions. We
Mm-hmm.
are we are social animals, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that happens. And I think what I really appreciate about your point is that sometimes, whether it's right, wrong, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
isn't the point, but like sometimes you have to do some of the things that are maybe low hanging fruit, or not low hanging fruit, but maybe you have to assume the risk,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
To
for
be able
sure.
to expose somebody to an experience that they then see, touch, feel, taste the thing for
Mm-hmm.
themselves, and
The,
they can understand it. I
yeah.
think I'm thinking now like of there are some leaders who have been pretty outspoken over the last few years really about, hey, diversity is good for our business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they can be loud about it now because they've had some successes with it, right? But it sometimes takes that, like, those wins that they can then see and evidence, and to your point, measure and all those things, which, for some folks who are a little bit softer and like less inclined to like lean into the data because they're just
Yeah.
like, I just know that this is going
Yeah.
to work.
Yeah.
It's sometimes we have to like win us over, right? And then
Yeah.
remind us to measure the thing. I'm putting, as I said, us, I'm putting myself sometimes in that
Yeah. Yeah.
category too.
Yeah.
But there is something around, um, you know, empathy, familiarity, right? Like familiarity with something makes it less likely that it's other, right? It
Yeah.
becomes something that, right? Like, this is gonna sound bananas, but when I was growing up, my father's Jamaican, my mother's Belgian, and I used to hear people all the time, they'd be like, and this they didn't they were not I recognized that people were coming from a good place.
Mm-hmm.
They would say, like, well, I mean, you're not black. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
actually, like, I
Right.
actually am. But and again, I know probably people blow up the comments me saying, well, that is a racist. I'm like, okay, maybe it was, but that it wasn't intending to be that way. It was just a recognition that, like, I know you, you're familiar to
Yeah.
me, and therefore it was destigmatized
Mm-hmm.
from something else that they might have had, right? Like
Yeah.
that they'd never had exposure to. And so I think that there is something even in business around having people sort of step outside of their bubble
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And have some of those people around. Okay. Um so one of my favorite things that you do is that you are the co-owner of NC Courage, which is,
Yeah.
for those who do not know, very successful National Women's Soccer League team. By the way, kudos to you all for this year having the most Olympic
Oh,
players represented on your team, like
that's
talent level
cool.
through the roof. So kudos. I'm curious, as you've been a co-owner in that,
Mm-hmm.
you've also been a part of venture studio. Well, is that what you call studio, or just like venture group underdog? I don't
Oh,
know.
it was Underdog Venture Team.
Underdog Venture Studio.
Yeah.
Amazing group of human beings. Like, I've not met anyone there that I don't just absolutely have a soft spot in my heart for.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so many good people. Um, and you're now with TMJ. I'm really curious about how you have seen and prioritized like inclusion and diversity all throughout different levels of the organization. Like, have there been some things that you've done as a leader to make sure that those things are taking place?
Ooh, great question. Um, let's see. I would say with all three of the organizations, which is probably what drew me to them, was they were already kind of doing the work, right? So there
Sure.
was
Yeah.
although we can always do more, right? So I can't say, oh, I did this and did that, because thankfully they're already thinking about that, right? In the women's
Yeah.
game, especially women's sports, sometimes it's just inherently political to be
Mm.
asking for equal pay. With Underdog Venture Team, there was a group of people with various backgrounds, experiences, cultural, all of it, that wanted to work with organizations that were mission driven, or projects that were mission driven. So that was a
Mm-hmm.
draw there. And then with TMJ, um, it is just again, back to the women's sports piece, it's 100% focused on women. I think we're the only
Mhm.
agency at this level that's 100% women talent. Like there is, as far as the soccer players, or if they are men, they're either coaches in the women's game, or in one particular, this one player, it's because he's very good, but we represent his sisters, right? So
Mm.
there's a couple exceptions there, but the point being, like, all three organizations, it's something that is just kind of from the beginning, it was just valued that way, right? So it's not
Mhm.
like I have to do a ton of work. But the work I do is just continue to celebrate it and show, that there's value there in each one,
Mhm.
right? With the women's game, we've seen valuations grow because that was such an undervalued, untapped, quite frankly, disrespected area of the industry that's
Mhm.
now, like on a rocket ship along with a lot of other women's sports like the WNBA or Unrivaled. And then Underdog has been growing like crazy. And, one of the, and, and I'm still an investor there. So I left my day job there, but still like, want to find ways for us to collaborate together. But just I love the
Mhm.
work that we did. And that's how you and I met, was through some of those conversations. Is
Yeah.
just these are people who are really, who care about each other, care about, just kind of working in a better like place and making and our working environments better. We're working with clients who want to see a better world. And what was really neat about that experience was just the people that I met there, but in particular one team member who's open about being trans. And that which is not the first time I actually worked with a trans person before. There was somebody, my first job out of college 25 years ago was trans and was actually, just transitioning. And it was like, oh, okay. But I didn't feel comfortable asking questions. I just didn't want to
Mhm.
impose. But then with this Underdog, having someone that I can work with day in and day out on a daily basis and like asking questions, and they were open about it and they talked about their experience. And I just thought, how
Yes.
cool are you and how brave of you are to like be open in a really tough society. And then and I felt so lucky to know this person, only to, find out like, a couple years later that in my own family, which I did not know, I had somebody who, was like, I'm trans. I was like, wow,
Right.
I felt better, just personally better equipped to handle that conversation and like
Yeah.
hopefully be supportive. And,
Mhm.
anyhow, so I think I went way off topic, but I just think
No.
the organizations I'm drawn to just have these, like, it's always people first. It doesn't matter what the title is,
Mm.
what the job is. It's like, do I like the people that I'm gonna be spending all my time with? If so, it's gonna be good.
Yeah. No, I don't think you went off topic at all. In fact, I'd love to double click on that for a
Okay.
second because I do think and I'm curious if you get this too, being that you are a Puerto Rican Palestinian woman, um that and it's better now, right? That people um there is a torch that someone bears who is able to navigate different cultural groups.
Mm.
Um, and I say it as to me, it is sometimes hard, but it's such a gift, right? Like, because people will ask me questions that they won't ask other people. And I come
Mhm.
back to so often, I'm like, well, and some people I know, they get so frustrated. They're like, that was rude, that was racist. I'm like, well, maybe, but like, how else are they supposed to
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
if I'm the first if I'm the first person they've ever encountered that they feel comfortable asking a question of, like, it shouldn't and this is where it gets a little controversial, like, you shouldn't bear the responsibility
Right.
of educating others, and
Yeah.
and there's truth in that. I want to acknowledge, like, we should do a better job collectively of being educated, and if
Mhm.
someone is willing to be vulnerable and curious with you, and they trust that you are a safe place to do that. A, kudos on making them, helping them to feel comfortable. And B, I hope that you can sort of
Mhm.
separate out those things. Like, this is a bananas example, but like this was a couple years ago actually. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and I went to a wine tasting with a friend of mine. And she is very similar in age to me, but like clearly white lady. And she's also a school psychologist, so she's used to like kids asking all kinds of weird questions. And we're at this wine tasting, and this older white lady, I mean, I'm gonna guess now that I'm 50, I would say she's probably in her like early 80s, super spry, but like, at this little wine tasting. And she walked over to me. We were just sitting having a drink, and she was like, "Can I touch your hair?"
Mm,
And my friend was mortified.
mortified.
Like, oh my God. And I just said, I said, "Here's the deal." I said, "Yes, you may." I said, "And I just want you to know that I'm really grateful you feel comfortable asking me that, but that's not something you should just ask the average bear." And then her response was, "Oh, well, why?" And I was like, "Would you want someone touching your hair?" And she's like, I
Right.
guess I never really thought about it that way,
Right.
And I was
Right.
like, again, my friend was like, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
She was
Just
like, I was just gonna like go
yeah.
off on her. And it's like, no, because this was an opportunity,
Yeah.
A, to treat, to educate, but B, also to just be like, I can, I'm glad.
Mm,
Total stranger feels like this is a safe
yeah.
place to ask a question. Now, some people say, no, she's just an entitled old white lady that felt like she could ask a question. And maybe that's true. I don't know her. But that sort of like that land
Yeah.
between,
Yeah.
is it can be really challenging. I'm really interested in A, your take on that personally, but B,
Yeah.
you've worked with a lot of folks and a lot of athletes, owners, investors who are they're the first in a room or a space, and I'm curious
Yeah.
if how you help
Yeah.
navigate that for those people.
Yeah. So everything you said completely resonates with me. I love when people ask me like, well, "Where are you from? Like, where are you really from?" Because they're not sure
They can't
who I
tell.
am, where I'm from, what by right? They just know I'm maybe not a certain thing, right?
Yes. I know she's
And
not this, or I think
yeah.
she's not
Or
this.
maybe she's
Yeah.
one of us, but I can't tell or not, right? So I actually love it. I love
Yeah.
the what is it? The ambiguity, the is it
Mhm.
racial ambiguity? I can't remember the exact term for it. Anyhow, but I actually love it because, there's I think in the US, there's a lot of people who kind of know what Puerto Ricans are, but
Mm.
don't realize we're US citizens and that
Yeah.
it is, I've become a little bit more, I think, radical in the last few years, but it is a territory or colony of the United States,
Mhm.
and there's all types of um or all types of um laws that prevent, Puerto Ricans from having like full rights and all these things,
Mhm.
right? So but then on the Palestinian side, nobody knows what that means. They
Right.
just most of the time they've heard the predominantly narrative that we're terrorists, right?
Mhm.
And
Right.
so I welcome the opportunity to be like, I'm not a terrorist, like I love sports and I love romance novels and I like, these TV shows and
Yes.
our food is so good, whatever. So I welcome it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I do, and I think that does come from when I brought up compassion being one of the words. I think that's why
Mm.
I've got other friends who are like, hell no, these entitled jerks. Like
Yes.
they think we need to fit in their spaces and are like really like, no, I'm not giving them an inch. And I also get that too.
Yep.
I don't judge them for feeling that way.
Right.
I validate it for that's not my approach all the time, but I definitely get it.
Mhm.
So, um, so yeah, that's my take on it. And it's to me, it does come from a place of like, I want people to be educated and know
Mhm.
and, and say, oh, like, I met somebody who was Palestinian. And she was so nice and
Mhm.
she was so cool, I hope. Or she was whatever, like a
Yeah.
positive interaction, right?
Yes.
And so, yeah,
So
that's
in your
important.
work with athletes who are navigating
Oh, yes.
some of this space, I'm curious, like, how do you help them do that? Right? Like, how do you
Yeah.
model that?
Yeah. It's, and what's I think nice for them. I don't know if I'm not an athlete, never been a pro athlete, so what do I know? But I think they're able to enter spaces where they maybe not, before, but if they
Mm.
weren't an athlete, maybe they wouldn't have access to,
Mhm.
right? So I think, um, I think the biggest thing for me is when I've seen them. I attended an event a couple weeks ago, and there was an athlete who was there, a black athlete, Olympian, won, a gold medal, and was kind of off to the side by herself.
Mm.
And I went up to her and I was like, hey, introduce myself. She probably thought it was maybe too much, and maybe that's why she stayed away. But it was like, why don't you come over here to this group? Let me introduce some people. Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
really cool that you're here. How'd you find out about the program? Like, we need more of you guys here, right? So I think it's really important for, whether or not they're an athlete or not. It's like, if you're here, you deserve to be here,
Yeah.
right? And you deserve to be seen and heard and ask questions. And it doesn't, at the end of the day, it really shouldn't matter. Like, I hate gatekeeping. I hate, like, not share, like, being open with information or sharing opportunities that, like you said, there's enough to go around. And if there's
Yes.
not enough, we can build some more. Right.
That's right.
So anyhow, I think that's probably the biggest piece is like, you deserve to be here, even if you don't know what they're talking about.
Mm.
This is an opportunity for you to learn. Because why shouldn't you? Right. So I
Yeah.
think it's probably the biggest piece is like, yeah, I'm sure it is tough for athletes if they've been predominantly focused on their sporting career, now having to retire or changing, and then that's not easy.
Yeah.
Number one, and number two, it's like, I'm sure there's some, and we have this even without being an athlete, right? Like I actually don't want to use this word or phrase again, but the whole syndrome and the
Mm-hmm.
doubts, like, what am I doing here? And
Yeah.
like, if you're here, you belong, right? You found
Yes.
some way, somebody saw potential in you, like, whatever the reason, you're here right now, just like everybody else. So, like, let's learn, let's go. What do you have questions about? Like, if I don't know the answer, here's somebody who might, and just
Yeah.
keep that ball
Yeah.
rolling.
I think that's fantastic. So, okay, I have three more questions for you.
Okay.
One is, if as we move forward and we know that a lot is changing in sports, right? And man, just rabbit trail for a second, like the women, especially in women's soccer and women's basketball, who for the last 15 years, the last 20 years have really like done the work,
Yeah.
right? Like, I shout out to them and the men who have been allies to them too, because that's important, right? It doesn't
Agreed.
happen without all of us.
True.
Um, but for them to really dig in and do this work, like, I'm so excited that they get to start seeing this shift
Yeah.
happen,
Yeah.
like, that's amazing. Um, but in thinking about how much has changed and yet how much still needs to change, are there any thoughts that you would leave leaders with, either if they're a sponsor of a company, they just have season tickets and
Mm-hmm.
they take their
Yeah.
employees, or maybe they're in sports or sports adjacent. Are there any things that you would recommend from for how they can, like, authentically make contributions to these inclusive initiatives rather than just
Yeah.
checking boxes?
Yeah. Oh, my memory's terrible, but there's literally, I saw a LinkedIn post today, by a friend of mine who works for this nonprofit that is focusing on getting more women and non-binary people
Mhm.
into venture capital.
Mhm.
And so she's focusing on, because even, you may have, like, there's so many top women athletes that are actually making really good money, right?
Yeah.
But
By me.
there's a good number, right? And
Yeah.
but how many of them are actually, like, investing themselves, like investing in other
Right.
women, or investing in companies, whatever?
Mm.
And so, anyhow, so she's trying to figure out ways to grow that gap between the the men athletes and the women athletes. But gosh, in terms of, and so she had, like, a whole list, which my brain is, like, overloaded with. It's everything from, like, even getting season tickets to merch to, is there a way, if you can't sponsor a team or a league, can you include talent to come
Mm.
and be part of your marketing programs? If not, they've got, great stories around being resilient, overcoming adversity, and leadership. Can they come speak to your group,
Mhm.
to clients or employees? So I think it's a big. I feel like there's so many ways you can, you can, depending on the industry that you're in, you can invest in some of these leagues, teams, clubs, and there's, like, a whole ecosystem that's out there. Also, like, it's really hot right now to invest in a team.
Yeah.
Really hot. The problem is other people are catching on, and it's now becoming limited, right? The
Yeah.
options to do that are very, very limited. So, like, what else can you do? That's something I've actually been thinking about. And I was talking to somebody, she's a former athlete. She played pro soccer. She's now on the investment banking side
Mhm.
and trying to find opportunities for investors to invest in the women's space, um, and finding women's uh, properties, finding investors, right? Just trying to match some folks
Mm-hmm.
up. And we were talking about, I'm like, that's what's on my mind now, right? So the access, I got real lucky. I came in at a really good time,
Mm-hmm.
where I could afford to get in. And now it's to billionaires and private equity money that's coming in and some other stuff. But, and so I was talking about like, I'm really, what's the word? It's not worried, concerned. Like, it's like, damn, like, how do we get other people to have access to these types of
Mm-hmm.
opportunities? And so I am thinking, like, what's the greater ecosystem of this industry where people
Mm-hmm.
can still invest even if they don't have, billions of dollars,
Yeah.
sometimes even millions of dollars. Where can they enter? And so that's, some areas of opportunities. But I think, in terms of if there's brands that are listening, it's definitely, can you incorporate talent? It's pretty cost effective. Women tend to, quite frankly, behave better than men. So there's not, it's less of a risk in terms of um, behavior, since there's going to be more attention in the women's sports space. We're just going to see increased um, media around them, and so that it's a smart buy, like whatever it is related to the women's sports space. Like, it's still a smart investment where you would see a return, whether it's marketing, whether it's investing, um even as a fan, to be
Yeah.
able to have like access to like actually meet these players on, on
Absolutely.
top, on top of, these other things. So anyhow, I think that's what I have. I'm gonna have
Okay.
to share you the article with you. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that'd be awesome. I would love it. Okay, last two questions. One,
Okay.
is there anything I should have asked you that I
Mm.
haven't, or something you want to leave us with to think about?
Oh, I kind of brought it up. I think going back to there's a lot of I'm like, I can go in so many different directions. I'm not focusing just like on women's sports for now. I
You focus
think
on whatever you want, Sarah. I got all day.
I think again, it's seeing, maybe it's like, what else should we be looking at? And to me, it's like
Mm,
digging deeper than what the shiny hot topic is, right? Because it's
yep.
gonna last for so long. Like, if you think about, we knew there was, back in early 2000s, it was like the internet, invest there. And then there was like a bubble that's moved on. Then it
Mm-hmm.
was, um, SaaS, apps, for, the iPhone. And then I'm not like the most tech forward person, so I'm probably skipping some like phases, but crypto was so huge, right? And now
Mm-hmm.
it's AI, right? And so that, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's also going to pass, right? So I think it's important for people to think about like what else in that kind of area,
Hmm.
uh within, I just talked about tech, but within the sports space, can people be looking at, in terms of future
Yeah.
investment? If it's not the team anymore, are there other avenues, whether it's startups focusing on this game? And it could be everything from like new drinks, sports drinks, to media
Yeah.
companies, to uh you know agencies, to whatever new stuff is probably gonna come out, apparel companies. I think there's like a whole world of opportunity that's out there beyond just like what's immediately in front of you. That's,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'd say even if, and I say that from kind of like a quote unquote investment standpoint, but even from like a career standpoint, there's so many ways to get into this space besides like being an athlete or working for a team
Yes.
or a league, right? You mentioned brands, but there's other ways to get in there. So I think that's probably the biggest piece, is like kind of dig a little deeper, whatever it is that you're interested in or somebody's interested in. Like, no, there's more than what's just on the surface. I feel really strongly about that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then lastly, how can listeners be helpful to you?
Oh, that's so nice. How can they
We're in it
helpful?
together.
That's so nice. Yeah, for me, it's all about like getting into women's sports. If you're on the corporate side and you want to work on, coming up with some really cool marketing campaigns, like soccer is going to be hot
Mm,
starting now through the Men's World Cup next year. It's going to take place in the US. The Women's World Cup's going to take place in 2027 in Brazil. There's there's a really good chance that it's going to be back in the United States in 2031. There's the Olympics in 2028. Like, like soccer is not going anywhere and it's
Yeah.
only going to keep growing. So in terms of like what people can do, it's like check out TMJ. If there's any athletes that look interesting that can maybe,
Yeah.
be a part of a marketing campaign. Yeah. So that's where my head's at. It's like, how do I get our talent to be more top of mind for a lot of these brands?
I love it. I've already got
Yeah.
some ideas, so you'll be hearing from me. You'll be hearing from me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sarah. This has been a great conversation to
Oh,
learn about women's sports, to learn about your history and like how you think about inclusion and diversity in your own experience. And couldn't agree more. Like you literally at the top, compassion, right? And like just showing up as yourself and how you lead is so important. That's what Human Side Up is all about.
can I
So
just
you
say
nailed it.
how much
Yeah.
I love that name, Human Side Up? I'm like, yes,
That
yes.
is all Katie Moss, my marketing guru. I'm super lucky. She was like, "What about this?" I'm like, "Yep, I'm in. I love
As
it."
soon as you hear it, you're like, yeah, it resonates personally so much. But I'm also thinking like, yeah, this is like a successful podcast, of course. With that name, everybody's listening to it.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, and I appreciate you. We'll look out. So if anybody has questions or wants to reach out to Sarah, please check out the show notes. We'll put her LinkedIn in there. We'll put a link to the company, and if you have questions, you can reach out to me or out to her directly. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Gracias. Shukran.
I told you, fiery, right? Joyful, just energetic and compassion. I love those words that she chose for herself because they are so very, very true. She is creating her own definition of executive presence, and I'm here for it. Let's be honest. So, if there is anything that you'd like to share with us about the episode, insights, or if you want to reach out to us or to Sarah, you can check us out in the show notes or reach out to us directly. But looking forward to seeing you the next time, and thanks for listening.